I've roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Balcones Distilling moved into its state-of-the-art building in downtown Waco, Texas in the spring of 2016. The old Texas fireproof storage building is one of the few that survived the 1953 Waco tornadoes, in which 114 people were killed. And the building's concrete structure also makes it a relatively safe place to mature whiskey. In fact, Balcones had been maturing whiskey here well before construction began. The stills are massive, with unique spiraling line arms that mimic the length and copper contact of those in the original distillery, on an order of several times larger.
These are not super, it's gonna make crazy looking stills. That'll be neat and people will be surprised or impressed by it. But our original stills, just the slope of the roof and where we had the pots, and then the line arm just kind of hugged along the sloping roof, and the condensers were on the other side. So it was a pretty long line arm with a pretty decent slope to it. And once again, that wasn't necessarily intentional to achieve a specific product when we did it, but it's the building we had.
Chip Tate founded Balcones Distillery in 2008 underneath Waco's 17th Street Bridge. Jared Himstedt was there from the beginning and helped build the place from the ground up.
Things are a little dusty.
With fermenters found on eBay and most of the other stuff made by hand and shoehorned to fit into an old welding shop.
So when we made those condensers, those things are pretty heavy. I never put them on a scale to weigh them, but when we had them done, we took this down, and I think we had 3 or 4 people up on the platform and a couple people down here and some ratchet straps, and obviously it was congested, so people were standing everywhere, and it still took a good 6 people to get those up. They were so heavy. And we had already built little cradles for them, and man, that last few inches was, every time we did it, I just thought somebody surely was going to throw their back out or drop it on their foot or something. And we had already built this platform for the mash tun before we put the mash tun in, and the auger was already in place, so we really had like a 3/4 inch or so on each side. We rigged up this crazy like skid system with these really long, like 2x12s, or I don't remember how big they were, and literally seesawed it. We had people, I was one of the people hanging off the other end as we like slid it up and then straightened it out like right at the last second. It was another very sketchy situation that I can't believe no one got hurt doing.
What did the building and the fire inspectors think when they came through here? This had to
yeah,
this had to have been fun.
that was dealing with the city was probably the most complicated part. And even when you're going to them with International Fire and Gas Code, they're still looking at you like you're crazy, and they wanted some of our suppliers to sign off on design plans and stuff for insulation, and it took some convincing. They weren't sold right off the bat, for sure.
They did a lot of things by hand back then.
We got some lights out.
For instance, the original stills did not have agitators to churn the liquid and grain.
When we were doing both runs in the spirit stills, as you're getting it up to temperature, you had to put, thermal gloves on and stand there we used a wood paddle so we wouldn't scratch the stills, but we had a big wooden paddle that we'd stick in there, and you had to stir it till I got up to boil and then close the hatch. Try not to lose too much booze while it's coming up to temperature.
And they did a lot of things by the seat of their pants.
I think it was like $300 cheaper to get these manufactured without being round. Just square was cheaper. And so because of that, they kind of sit funny. And so we'd put weights on to hold it down, especially when we're doing CIP and you're spraying cleaning stuff in there. The CIP ball would go in through this hole where there's a little plate covering it now, but because they're wobbly, it would just spray everywhere, so we'd put weights on there to hold the corners down and keep whoever was doing it from getting too wet.
Jared Himstedt took over as head distiller after Chip Tate's controversial departure at the end of 2014, when the investors who owned a majority of Balcones bought him out. Those same investors put more than $15 million into building the new Balcones Distillery. Spiders have taken up residence in the old place now, and if you listen closely, you might hear a critter or two rummaging around.
I hope the rats don't mind that we're visiting. I haven't seen any, but
8 years in that old distillery gave Jared Himstedt a lifetime of experience that can't be replaced.
And even though I don't stir fermentation anymore by hand, I know what's going on in there, you know. We walked out and we smelled them and we touched them and we tasted them before they were 3-story high fermenters, when you could just lift the lid and peek into it. That level of interaction with the product at all the stages was really nice. And even though I don't have to, like, I know what's going on in the fermenter, partly because for years we had our faces in it, you know.
It's hard to describe Balcones now, and Jared Himstedt admits that. Is it a large, small-scale distillery or a small, large-scale distillery? Over the next year or two, the remaining stocks of whiskey distilled under the 17th Street Bridge will be bottled, and like most things in life, the future will depend on how well Himstedt and his team adjust to their new home. For more cask-strength conversation on whiskeys, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In Waco, Texas, I'm Mark Gillespie.